Hello. Hi, everyone. Just wanted to thank you for joining us today. My name is Alan Osborne. I'm the Chief Business Development Officer with Family Source Consultants, and I'm here with my friend, the founder of International Fertility Insurance, Jason Smith. He's been a wonderful asset to our agency for a long time now, and he is our go-to when it comes to everything insurance. But today we're focusing on ACA, open enrollment, Obamacare, whatever you want to call it. Really, we just kind of wanted to have a dialogue back and forth. I personally know that I talk to a lot of intended parents that don't know much about what open enrollment really is. And with it being around the corner, starting in November, I believe, I thought this would be a good opportunity for us to kind of just get some rudimentary, like basic information out to intended parents out there. So without further ado, we're just going to jump into it. Jason, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So look, what is ACA? What does it stand for?
Sure. So ACA is otherwise known as the Affordable Care Act. Like you said, some people would know it as Obamacare. It was started in 2010 by President Obama, and it's that's where that term came from. But it's been going strong for I guess we're now 12 years now, and it's gotten a bit more expensive each year. So it's some of us joke that it's the Unaffordable Care Act, but it's certainly I would say that even with joking about it a little bit, it's generally speaking the most cost-effective way to go through a surrogate pregnancy, as long as it can fit. And we'll talk about how it works and all that as we go along. But that's what it is. It's the Affordable Care Act. It's the normal health insurance, if you will. If you aren't getting insurance from your employer, it's something that U.S. citizens would buy.
When is open enrollment? When can you get an ACA plan? When's the best time to sign up?
Sure. So there's 50 states in America, and most of them are on what's called the federal system. And so most of them follow the same guideline, which would mean that it would start November 1st and generally run through December 15th for a January 1st start date. And then in many states, I'm not sure whether this will be permanent or if it's a temporary thing in relation to COVID, but there's now in most states the ability from December 16th onward to get usually through mid-January, to get a plan that will start February 1st. So it's generally speaking, November, December, and January would be a broad way of saying it. There's some variations. Each year, our team is sort of feverishly putting together a list of when it starts and stops in each state. And like Idaho, for example, this year is going to start October 15th. So 15 days earlier than everybody, or 16 days earlier than the rest of the country. And historically, with COVID going on, for example, we've seen some states extend it longer based on if they think that it's a necessity for people to be able to get coverage, that they might have had troubles getting coverage, that kind of thing.
Has there ever been any sort of explanation, or do you have an explanation as to why there is a window of time to sign up for this?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because we work with, as you know, we work with a lot of intended parents from around the globe, and in a lot of other countries, there's just sort of universal health care, and it's just everybody gets it, and it's everything's covered more or less, and it's obviously quite different. So the reason why there's a temporary window is that you are supposed to have it all year round, but you are supposed to choose a plan that will fit you for many years, not just buy the best plan out there because you just found out that you have cancer, for example, or buy the best plan out there just because you just found out that you're pregnant. So these are some sort of, or you have a heart issue or something like that. They want you to buy something that you're expecting to use for at least a year, if not a much longer period of time, not just buy it when you need it and change to the the best plan that to cover the most at the time that you need it. They're hoping that you just buy it on a more routine basis, because not as opposed to covering a specific issue that just came up. And part of that is because it's guaranteed issue. So it doesn't matter what pre-existing conditions you have, everybody is guaranteed to be able to get it. We'll talk at some point about exclusions for surrogacy. So it's not guaranteed to cover everything, but everyone is allowed to get insurance regardless of their health conditions.
How long does it last then?
Great question. So this is one of the tricky, there's sort of advantages and disadvantages to ACA plans as relates to a surrogate journey. One of the disadvantages is that it generally starts January 1st for most people, sometimes February 1st, you can do it as well, but it will end December 31st. Now on December 31st, the plan that you have may renew, and it may renew with the exact same conditions, or it may go away entirely, or it may change. So for example, let's say you have the Anthem 80 plan. It might, when December 31st comes around, you'll be looking, or will help to see whether the Anthem 80 plan is still there or not. And does it look exactly the same? If it covered surrogacy in 2022, is it also going to cover surrogacy in 2023? Or has something changed within the typically 125 page or so booklet that describes the plan? So yeah, long story short, it starts either January 1st or February 1st, ends December 31st, but sometimes we'll renew.
So what happens if you miss the open enrollment period and you really want this kind of coverage? And what are your options?
Sure. So we offer a plan that we call the IFI Surrogacy Maternity Plan, which is backed by the world's largest specialty insurer called Lloyd's of London. And it's a cost-effective way of providing a surrogate maternity coverage anytime throughout the year. So in theory, if you were really hoping to match for a January 1st or so timeline to have a transfer and hopefully get pregnant, but just the circumstances didn't present well and you needed to do this and your timing was more like April, for example, or March or June, you could use our other plan. That's one thing. You do have to qualify, or not you, but your surrogate does need to qualify for it. But generally speaking, that's an option. And then some people, if it's like a little bit later in the year, let's say it was more like September, October, maybe August even, you could start on that plan and move off of it to an ACA plan if there's a better fit. And in the industry, we call that bridge the gap. We're providing a bridge and across this gap until January 1st. So you can use our other plan for the whole pregnancy, or you can use it for as much as you need until there's an ACA plan, if there's one that's a better fit.
Yeah, that's a nice option, because a lot of intended parents, that would prefer the ACA if they had to provide coverage for their gestational carrier, but they just don't know when they're going to get matched, right? So it's nice to have that there. You touched on it a little bit earlier about some of the disadvantages of it. The ACA maybe just ending on December 31st, like comparing it to a private policy, like what are the advantages of ACA versus, medical maternity private policy?
Sure. So it's a great question, and there's pros and cons to each. So some of the advantages of an ACA plan are that it's unlimited coverage. So if we compare that to this other option that I just shared, the other option I shared will naturally come with $500,000 of coverage, but you can increase it to $750,000 or $1 million for an additional fee. But the ACA plan, literally, if you somehow had $3 million of need, it would be there for that. There is no cap to it. So that's certainly one of the big advantages. The next would be that it covers all medical needs. So let's just say theoretically you have a surrogate that has no health insurance. Everyone's supposed to have health insurance here, but not everyone does. If you had a surrogate that had no health insurance, this plan will not just cover pregnancy, but if she broke her arm, if she was sick, whatever the case, she would have, it's a plan that's going to cover all your medical needs with some exclusions. The exclusions would be things like elective surgeries, or some of the plans will exclude surrogacy as another example. But assuming you had a plan that didn't exclude surrogacy, one of the other benefits would be that it's sort of, I don't want to say all inclusive, but it would cover things like a sore throat or all sorts of doctor visits. That it just doesn't cover things that the insurance company would think you don't necessarily have to do, like cosmetic surgery, that kind of thing. Gotcha. Another advantage is that is the cost. So I'll actually, I think, flip to a slide on this. The ACA plans will generally run, and we're shooting this video, this webinar in September, and so we have a general idea of what next year's plans will look like, but we're still getting new plans and evaluating them. So these could all change a little bit, but generally speaking, the plans will run for somewhere in the range of $400 to $600 per month, and then sometimes as high as $1,200, give or take. Again, we're expecting a little bit of an increase as we go into 2023, but it's still probably be somewhat in this range. On top of that, you've got shared expenses of somewhere between $3,000 to the max, what they call the maximum out of pocket is $9,100 for 2023. And then on top of that, you have the cost of us researching and searching for a plan and searching through all the booklets looking for plans that don't have exclusions. So there are some costs there. And then we would usually recommend what's called a secondary plan, which is to say if your surrogate was in, for example, Illinois, but she had a reason that she needed to move to Louisiana, as an example, her insurance from Illinois might not cover her in Louisiana. And so we do offer what's called a secondary plan, and it's a couple $1,000s for that. So if we total all that up, if we were to compare that to alternates, particularly on a complicated pregnancy where you were to, for example, max out this maximum out of pocket, this is going to be a very cost-effective solution compared to others, especially if by chance you're considering a multiple embryo transfer. The cost of these plans is the same, whether it's one embryo or two. It's the difference might be that there might be more care. It might be closer to the $9,000 versus the $3,000. But the cost is definitely an advantage of this plan in general. Now, it's important to note that it ends on the 31st, and if your pregnancy crosses over into the next year, you may very well have additional months of this, depending how many transfers it takes to be successful. And if you cross into a new year, this number would the share of the medical bills would start over at 0 for the new year. So it could be higher, but generally speaking, these are the costs of this. Whereas the other plans that we would talk about will generally be somewhere in the range of maybe $17,000 to $25,000 for an uncomplicated pregnancy, or about $32,000 for a complicated pregnancy. Though it could be higher if you're having twins, if you have high cost providers, things like that. So generally speaking, the cost is an advantage. The disadvantages would be that the ACA plans have a network. So there'll be specific doctors and hospitals that you can use to have the most cost-effective care. So if you were looking to have a baby with Dr. Chin at Chicago Memorial Hospital, it may not be what we call in-network for the healthcare plan that you're looking for. So it might be in-network, which would be the best rates, or it might be out of network, which would be more expensive, but still covered, or it may not even be in either, it may just be out of network entirely. So one of the disadvantages is that you have to really be in the networks to have these plans work in a cost-effective way. The timing is certainly a negative of ACA. You need to buy it during a certain time. It ends December 31st. We do have the secondary plan you can buy to alleviate that concern, but whereas the private plans, they're available year-round, and they just don't care about timing whatsoever. And then the last thing would be that the ACA plans, many of them will have exclusions or liens. An exclusion is pretty straightforward. It's that surrogacy is excluded, as an example. And this will vary state by state. Some states, exclusions are outlawed. Some states, they're very legal. So it'll vary state by state. The other thing that can get in the way is what's called a lien. So some of the states will have what's called a lien, and a lien is where part or all of the surrogate's compensation can be added as a cost to use the plan. So, for example, the insurance carrier might say, yes, we'll cover a surrogate pregnancy, but because she's being compensated X number of dollars, we want that back before we're going to cover the plan, or we'll cover your medical needs, but part of our agreement is that if there's any surrogate compensation, that comes back to us. And so that makes it pretty cost ineffective to use an ACA plan. So these are the pros and cons. It's a lot of information, and we don't expect anybody on this call to get it right off the bat. We're here to help guide you through it, when it's your time.
Sure. I mean, yeah, just from speaking to intended parents, and when we get to the topic of insurance, you have to have health insurance for them to be accepted into our program. Some of them have the exclusion for medical maternity. So really, I think you were on this slide earlier, but like, they want the nuts and bolts or what this is going to cost them. If they have to purchase ACA to get medical maternity insurance for their gestational carrier, what kind of deductibles, co-pays are we talking about throughout their journey? That's really what they want to know.
Okay, so deductibles and co-pays. So let's talk about those terms, because they may not make any sense to about half of the people watching this. If you live in another country and have universal health care, you may not even be familiar with the term deductible or copay. So a deductible means an amount of money that you have to pay, or that in this case the surrogate would be the actual insured person, but an amount that needs to be paid before the insurance company starts to pay. A copay is sort of an exception to that rule, where there might be a deductible, but maybe there's a specific amount for example, office visits or specialist visits. So maybe you have a $2,000 deductible, but you have a $30 copay for an office visit. Then if there's an office visit to see a doctor for a common need, you don't have to necessarily pay the $2,000 first. Sometimes you can just pay the copay. Coinsurance is another term that you'll hear. And coinsurance means typically after you've covered the deductible. So let's say the deductible is $2,000, for example. And then let's say there's 20% coinsurance. That would mean that the insured needs to pay 20% of the bill, where the insurance company will pay 80% of the bill, until you get to the final term, which is called the maximum out of pocket. And the maximum out of pocket means that there's a cap to where once this is achieved, then the insurance company will pay all the covered claims. So again, sometimes there'll be an exclusion like cosmetic surgery, or maybe acupuncture or chiropractic care might be excluded. Sometimes you might see things like that. But generally speaking, for the typical medical needs, once you've hit that maximum out of pocket, then the insurance company will pay the rest for the remainder of that year. So, just to come back to it, what are the costs? It's typically going to be $400 to $600 a month. I think our average last year was right around $470 per month. And so that's the cost to buy the plan each month. And then you have this combination of deductible, co-insurance, co-pays, maximum out of pocket, like I shared. And depending on how complicated or simple the pregnancy is, generally speaking, on the low end, we might see $3,000 or maybe even a little bit less. And on the high end, if things were to be very complicated, people would hit that max out of pocket, which for next year, 2023, is going to be $9,100. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I think you touched on this earlier. The nice thing about the ACA is that it would not matter if she's carrying twins or not, right?
Absolutely. So with this plan, let's just say you have not only twins, but you have a really, really complicated pregnancy with lots of office visits, lots of, like, I have twins myself, and we had, I can't even tell you how many ultrasounds. You know, we definitely hit our maximum out of pocket. And we didn't have a whole lot of hospital stays, but we did have a couple check-ins that involved hospital stay. So I'd say an unusually, relatively complicated pregnancy, but everything's great. My twins are healthy and teenagers now. But but regardless, but the point is, regardless of whether you had $300,000-$400,000 of bills, you would hit that maximum out of pocket, and then the insurance company would pay the rest. So whether if you have a singleton, it's probably going to be a better likelihood that you'll be towards the lower end of this number. If you have twins, I would say I would really count on hitting that max out of pocket, because there's just so much attention on a twin pregnancy. Even if it's a perfectly good one, they're going to do a lot of ultrasounds.
And so a typical ACA policy, let's say it's a twin pregnancy, obviously a much higher risk pregnancy. Does the ACA cover NICU if the gestational carrier ends up there?
That's a great question. So generally speaking, no. This insurance is a good way of thinking of it is, this insurance is to cover the care of the surrogate. This is not an insurance plan for the baby. Now, where the gray area is when is the baby the intended parents? But in most cases, there's what's called a pre-birth order, and there's essentially a legal arrangement that the baby will become the intended parent's child at birth. And so this plan is not the intended parent's coverage, nor the baby's coverage. This is a plan for the surrogate. She's the insured person here. So now the baby comes out, or babies, and it's an entirely different concept. So if you're talking about United States-based intended parents, they would have their own U.S. health insurance, and they would want to check with their own providers, like just turn over your insurance card, call them and say, hey, I'm planning to have a baby at this hospital with this doctor. I just want to learn how it will work to add my baby or babies at that time. If you're an intended parent from outside the US, you'll probably need what's called newborn insurance. And we have a variety of products and offerings for that. And I'm sure we'll probably do a different session on that.
But if the gestational carrier ends up in the ICU, though, her existing coverage would take care of her on that, most likely. Right?
Absolutely. So this ACA plan, if hopefully it doesn't happen, but if you're a surrogate, we're hospitalized for 2 weeks or 30 days or whatever it might be, this would cover that.
Okay. So another question I would get from intended parents would be like, what other costs would come up? You could keep adding insurance on and on as far as you want to go, right? But what typically would come up in a pregnancy? So there's so just in terms of the medical needs in relation to the pregnancy, I would say that the things to be aware of are, number one, we would suggest what's called a secondary plan. I talked about one of the disadvantages of ACA being that the network is important, and just theoretically, if the surrogate were to move on just a
family issue or so forth, then you'd want to have a backup plan, and we call that a secondary or backup or contingent plan. So that's a cost of $2,000 typically to buy it. It varies based on underwriting, but generally speaking, that's the nature of that. So that's a cost to ponder. Some of the other things that are not covered that may not be covered, I should say, complications of IVF. We have an entirely different plan for that, which is really inexpensive. It's typically $200-300 for that per cycle. But typically these plans will start at confirmation of pregnancy. So we do have a different plan that we can offer to cover complications of IVF. Some other things might seem very important to you, but the insurance company might not think that they're necessary. So if genetic testing might be an example. Sometimes it's covered, sometimes it's not. Yeah, generally speaking, the good majority of things that relate to the pregnancy would be covered by this plan.
Okay. So how would you?
The other thing I guess I would add, and I don't think it's probably the right place to get into it, but we offer a service to search for and find these plans. There's a fee associated with that. For 20, it'll vary by year depending when you're watching this, but for 2022, 23, that's $475 to search for the plan. We have other services that can be added on to that. Like we have a payment monitoring service to make sure that the payments are made every month, because we talked about the timing, right? And remember that you can only buy this typically in November or December, or sometimes January. If the payment were to be missed, the insurance payment were to be missed in April, for example, then all of a sudden you'd find yourself with no insurance leading up to the delivery, for example. So we have a service to monitor those payments every month and answer questions throughout the journey. We also offer a medical billing management service, which I can't stress enough how important it is. That's to manage all the bills throughout the pregnancy, evaluate the coding on them, make sure that you're not being overcharged or excessively charged for services. So these are just some additional services we offer, but just know that there will be some costs associated with finding the plan in the first place and managing it.
Let's walk through like a typical intended parent signs up with our agency. It takes them about, on average, maybe that's under 6 months to get them matched. When do they need to purchase insurance? And, assuming they fall into this window of time where they can get the ACA, or, it makes sense to bridge the gap.
Sure. So I'll just bridge the gap first. So bridge the gap, well, I guess all three, right? We offer another plan that I mentioned, the IFI Surrogacy Maternity Plan. We offer that all year round. So if somebody comes into your program and is matched in March, April, May, June, July, they're probably going to buy that. And given that timing, they're probably going to stick with it. If they come into the program in the middle of the year, maybe July, August, September, October, they may be, bridge the gap might make sense. With that, you would just ask us about it, and we would go through a whole different dialogue about that program and explain the intricacies of it and the costs and run through it. And if it made sense, somebody would start on that program, which from a timing perspective, it takes, we do an actual customized estimate where we reach out to the doctor and hospital that you'd like to use, and we negotiate rates with them and drill down on that. And that process can take a week or two, depends on how fast we can get a hold of the financial counselors at the different offices. Then there's underwriting for those plans, which can take maybe another week. And so that's, it's about a 2 or 3 week period to get one of those going. The ACA, right now we're filming this in September. I believe October 10th, we're going to start taking requests for the ACA. And the exception to that might be the state of Idaho is going to open early this year. on October 15th. So we will, if somebody had an Idaho surrogate, we could probably start working on it now. But all the other states were lining up to be looking at plans in November and December. So, early October, we would take a request. They would pay our search fee at that point. One thing that's important to note is if you do request a search and we're unable to find a plan that fits, we'll refund some of the money. So that's a nice feature of working with IFI. But we start taking the requests in October. They would pay the search fee. Then the plans would actually start January 1st, unless you wanted, and it was available to have a February 1st start date. Let's say your transfer was going to be around that time instead of the turn of the year. So basically the month ahead of your start date, they would start paying the monthly premium, and then they would, generally speaking, have particularly family source clients would generally have IFI managing the medical bills. So I know that Family Source firmly suggests that. So we would, generally speaking, have collected an escrow to be prepared to pay we're on the screen here, the $3,000 to $9,000. We would have money available ready to pay those bills. And as each step of the pregnancy progresses, we would evaluate the bills and make sure that they're appropriate, that the different aspects of the bill are applied to the deductible and co-pays and co-insurance and maximum out of pocket appropriately. And then we would go ahead and pay the bill based on the money collected, or from the money collected, that is. So long story short, you start paying the monthly premium, generally speaking, in advance of the month you're going to start it. And then you would usually advance enough money to cover the pregnancy, and then that money would be sitting there waiting to pay the bills throughout the pregnancy.
All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap this up here. One of the things that Family Source Consultants prides ourselves on is that we communicate very well with potential intended parents, with our clients. And it's the reason we like working with your company as well, is you guys respond very quickly. I do know, just from personal experience working with you, that you get back to people right away. And I'm just so comfortable, referring intended parents to you. Just what do I do if I have additional questions? How do I get a hold of you guys?
So this is our contact information. If you want to call us, or I would say email is a great way to start. You can just write info@internationalfertility.com. That gets directed to our team. If you're actively working with Family Source Consultants, then you can either reach out to us directly or reach out through your case manager, and they'll know how to connect you.
Awesome. Jason, thank you so much for doing this. I know this is an extremely busy time of year for you and your colleagues, and this is really helpful. I think it just answers some of the basic questions about the ACA, and hopefully, everyone out there found it helpful as well. We'll let you go and have a great, rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, you bet. I appreciate that you have this care and concern. So we're happy to help.
Thanks. Bye-bye.